Thank you very much, and thank you to my colleague Chali. Our presentation is going to run in this way. First, I'll present the introduction, and then I'll give Reverend Chali to get into the main body of the discussions, and then I'll take over rather the conclusion of the whole study. This is an ongoing study that we did, and which we are still doing even now, on the experiences of different population groups on the COVID-19, especially those on the margins. So this is just one part of the work that we're doing. We're looking mainly at women church groups that are part of the United Church of Zambia, and who are also either street vendors or selling on the market. So in the introduction there, I want just to give a brief history of markets or women markets, especially in Zambia. In most cases, when we talk about women markets, what comes in our mind is that we look at these women as just ordinary women, uneducated, and sometimes not even churched. But what was very interesting in this study is that 99% of the women that sit on the market are also members of particular churches, and they belong to these women church groups, which are called by different names in different contexts within the African communities. For example, in South Africa, they are called Manyanos, and we also find these women also in groups such as the Anglican Church, the Seventh-day Adventist, with different names and different activities. So when we look at this population group or this group of women, in as far as their experiences to COVID-19, our main focus was actually to look at what is it that they went through and how did they actually respond to COVID, and what was the role of the church. Because we believe that what is happening again in the context of our churches is that when we talk about church and when you talk about even ecumenism, whatever activities that are happening, these women seem to be on the margins. And yet they are, as Messi Odioye would argue, and many other African women scholars, the church in Africa. So in Zambia, we are saying that women who sell in the markets are not so much included on the list of working women. Amin Mama is one of the key scholars that has written on gender studies as way back as 1996. She argues that studies of women's work have led to many conceptualization of what we mean by the term work and economy. And therefore, it is an important observation that she makes, that we especially try to relate these issues of women work or women's work, and specifically women who work in the markets, as something that has a dichotomy. These women are either seen in some contexts are just domestic workers and ordinary housewives, as one would argue, but the other part that they do, and that is to work and bring food in their homes or to provide economic, empowerment into the home, is not actually studied or is not even recognized in certain sects. So this is where we are. We are trying to look at how do we bring the activities of these women, besides being called housewives or domestic workers in their homes, to a concept where they are also recognized as workers who are also contributing to the economy or to the household economy as per se. The next slide, please. Okay, there's just one slide that we want to look at, which talks about research on gender relations and as it relates to women. Now, when we look at the research on gender relations as it relates to women, again, there is a quote there by Amina Mama, who argues that African research into gender relations and work is practically fascinating because of the enormous range of activities that African women engage in as far as work is concerned. And within this engagement, we find that right from the pre-colonial to colonial to post-colonial perspective, there has been different activities and consideration of what we mean by women and work. And in most cases, we find that what is actually seen as work for women is mainly domesticated, and yet we see in her work and many other works of scholars that when we look at women's work, we find that women actually come into two forms. They are either productive or reproductive labor. So in both works, we find that if they are not being at home, they are in the market space, and both are supposed to be seen as work and need to be celebrated as such. Now, despite these challenges in defining work, especially women's work, women themselves have been able to creatively find ways of making what they do remarkable and valuable for their families. For example, when we looked at these women groups, we found that these women groups, they are actually found on the market, some of them from as early as 5 o'clock in the morning up to late hours of the night, selling basic foods like fresh vegetables, fish, and other related products that are actually for daily consumption and are very valuable for every community where these women are. So they are, besides the shops that we have, the state shops that we have, like ShopRites, and the other state shops that sell vegetables and basic food products, they are actually the key, group, or the key population group that provides the immediate basic foods for the communities at a reasonable or affordable price in such a way that ordinary communities actually completely rely on what these women put on the market. In our country, Zambia, we are not so privileged like any other maybe well-developed countries where you find all the vegetables are in the market or on the shops, in the shops, or they are on the actually supermarkets. These women, in one way or the other, they have become our supermarkets. And so we celebrate their work as the immediate provider of the basic foods that each and every individual is able to access at a very convenient time of the day. Next slide, please. So when you look at the brief history of Zambia, where are we going with all this? We are saying that if you look at market trading, it's one of the oldest actually history in humanity. And among the Zambian communities, we are looking at market trading as it was in the copper belt at the time when the mines were being actually introduced. And if you look at the mining history and you look at the emergence or the founding of the United Church of Zambia, at the center, you find that there is a relationship there that also brings in or brings to their core the role of these women. Because at the time when the Copperbelt mine was flourishing, one of the people or one of the groups that helped the economy to thrive in terms of food production were women who were selling on the market. History has it, if you look at the next slide that will be shown, that at one time in history, at Lone Antelope Mine in Luancha, the mine workers actually began to divide plots for women or the wives of the miners for them to produce basic products that were actually given to the miners as a supplement to what they were getting from their mine bosses. You remember that if you grew up on the copper belt, there was what was called rations. And the rationing program actually thrived at one time in the 1935s because of these women's activities as they were selling the vegetables to the mines. And the mines were able actually to save some resources because there was this population group. So when we look at these women, we are assuming that these women were not just any other women, because around 1965, the United Church of Zambia was born in this very space on the copper belt, where these women, some of them could have been members of the United Church of Zambia, and they could have been also marketeers who continued not only to support the mine by providing basic foods to the miners, but also supported the church in one way or the other. The next slide, please. So I'll leave my colleague to talk about the motivation of the study and where we are going with the study, and then I'll do the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. The motivation to this study is simply that, as you have alluded to, that women are mostly the majority in our church, and they contribute in most of the activities of the church. financially and also in the ministry. But at the time of COVID-19, there was so much that began to happen that the churches were closed. And even sometimes you would find that markets were closed because of the restrictions from the authorities. And so looking at where and when COVID-19 began and today, as we compare the church, you find that there is a huge difference. And so as a minister in one of these congregations where we took the survey in Kaoma, I began to wonder as to what has happened, and took time also to interview 10 women from the United Church of Zambia between the age of 45 to 70, from Kaoma as well as the Copper Belt in the United Church of Zambia, who most of them are leaders who help in the pastoral work, and the others are just the members of the Women Christian Fellowship. These also are marketeers who contribute to their families by selling foodstuffs, like it has been alluded to, which are perishable. And so these women, when you go to the next slide, please, discover that in their work, apart from being marketeers, they go out to encourage one another, taking care of the aged. With the little resources that they have, they're able to bring together resources and visit those that are elderly and unable to provide. And so this picture is one of the visitation that they usually undertake every Tuesday to visit the sick and elderly and those that are bereaved. The next slide, please. They have fellowship with them, but when they go to the market, next slide, you find that the reason why most of these women engaged were prompted to begin selling at the market is that most of them are not in formal employment. They have responsibilities that they need to take care of, mainly because of the 10, the majority of them are widows who don't have husbands to be able to provide for them. And then the others have either been left by their husbands, and only one was seen to have a husband who was not working, and at the time, the only source of income was from the woman who is now this member of the WCF, who sells so that she's able to feed the family. Next slide, please. And so when we asked them why they couldn't leave the market, they responded to say it is very difficult because what happens if they stop trading? The trading is their only source of income in their homes. But there was a time when the markets were closed due to the high rate of the COVID infections and deaths. These women actually came out to say, we were scared, and most of us were very sick to the point that we almost died. But because there was no other way of taking care of our families, we had no other source of income, we still continued to go to the markets despite the risks, because we needed to feed our families. And the business became slow because most of the traveling was restricted, and so they couldn't order other merchandises that they needed to sell because they were afraid of those that were coming from other districts. Maybe they carried the COVID-19, which can be spread. And so there was that kind of confusion within the COVID-19, which made these women to be able to either go bankrupt or even just have little resources left for themselves, because some of the the materials that they had ordered, the vegetables, and even just the fish could not be finished because people were also scared of traveling and going to the markets in these moments. And so when you look at the response of the church, these women actually came out to say the church has not done anything for them during the COVID-19, because at the time when they really needed the support of the church, the prayers and the materials, as well as financially, the church had closed down its doors to them, and the prayers were offered from afar, meaning that they couldn't get even the hope that they would needed to get from the church. Most importantly, since their businesses had gone down, the church could not even support them by giving them the capital because it didn't also have the resources. And so it is a time for the church to actually be able to revisit the where mission is done, because at the end of it, we find that these women contribute so much, but if they are not being able to take care of themselves and their families, they starve, what will then happen to them? So the church needs to adequately prepare for the measures to undertake when such disasters come, and also be able to rehearse with the government on how they can be able to help the church and the people.
I see that we are behind time. Please allow me just to say one or two things on each slide. Is 2 minutes all right?
Yeah,
I'll take a minute on it. Yes, thank you. So in essence, what we are trying to do is to look at the experiences of these women from a liberation theology for ordinary church women's perspective, because we argued that African women theology is a theology of liberation, and its core, at the center of its core, is a liberation of humanity from all forms of oppression. And within this study, there was one interesting aspect that came out, that one of the women actually said, I've been in this church since I was at Sunday school. The only time the church helped me was at the time when they came to comfort me when my husband died. Now, in our argument, in the conclusion, we are saying that these women are supposed to be recognized as the church, because remove these women with the red, black, and white from any African church, especially in the United Church of Zambia, then you don't have church. Then you don't have any communicable body. So we are arguing that there is a need for a liberation theology that is going to look at the ordinary women such as this. Can I have the last slide, please? I'll just say one thing and then we can. Yes. So another thing that we actually saw to be very important was the use of narratives. You know, when we spoke to these women, we realized that actually their songs, their whispers, their cries, and their groanings and shouts are actually something that needs to be listened to. And maybe it is time we began to actually focus more as Christians and academics and even ministers of the Word of God on the indigenous local theologies, so that we begin to do this kind of theology that actually is relevant to the women. They did not actually, or they were not interested in hearing something that is more hierarchical or more classical or churched, but they just wanted to relate their stories in songs, in cries, and in groanings to the people that they thought would be of help. Thank you.
We have only 8 minutes, and I think Shingi is here. Can we ask Shingi to offer maybe 1.5 minutes of response, Shingi, and then we'll have a discussion with the panel. Thank you, Shingi.
Okay, thank you, Sione, and thank you to Lilian, Chali, and Mary. They come from a context which is very familiar to me. I did my theological training in Zambia. So I stayed for 4 years in Zambia, and I think we have a shared history, a shared colonial history of the Rhodesian era, because we were kind of one country. We still have relations across, together, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And I appreciate from Lilian and Chali's paper, I really appreciate their effort to liberate the informal women's sector, economic sector. It's an important one. It's the same in Zimbabwe. It's the same in Malawi. Women play an important part in supporting the church itself, in supporting the ministers. I think all the ministers in those countries know that. They play an important part in educating the children as well. So the informal sector, which is played by the market women, should be recognized.